Hey gang, how's it going? This is Nate on the Stone. Welcome back to my channel. And today we are talking about why the gay community is no longer oppressed. I've mentioned before here on the Stone how the gay rights movement and the gay community in general has come a long way since the Stonewall riots of 1969. Throughout the 70s, 80s, and the 90s, the gay community went from being an underground organization to actually just becoming full part and parcel of the general mainline culture. And how it wasn't that long in the grand scheme of things before being gay was just a regularly accepted part of society. This all actually crescendoed with a series of Supreme Court cases. There was Lawrence versus Texas, which abolished unenforced laws against homosexuality. There was United States versus Windsor, which overruled the government's Defense Against Marriage Act, which had been passed in the 90s. And of course, there was the Obergefell versus Hodges 2015 decision, which actually legalized gay marriage throughout the United States. This, a mere 11 years after Bill O'Reilly went in front of his audience on his syndicated show on Fox to say that Americans would never, ever, ever in a million years accept gay marriage. Today, sitting where we are in 2019, we might tend to forget just how radical a trend this was. It made the US join a very small group of nations that broke, rightly or wrongly, with the entire course and flow of human history and thinking. It was the very definition of a watershed moment. And that should have been the end of it, right? Once the gay community won the right to get married, a right which actually wasn't on the table to begin with, the end goal being civil unions back in the dark ages of the early 2000s, where was there left to go? The top of the mountain had been reached, full equality had been achieved, and the gay community could look back on a job well done and bask in the satisfaction that they had won their fight. Maybe in a parallel universe somewhere, because the refrain that we keep hearing, particularly in June during Pride Month, is that the gay community is still being crushed under the boot of oppression. This month, for example, we saw the outrage stemming from the fact that the Trump administration refused to allow U.S. embassies across the world from flying the rainbow flag during Pride Month, a practice that was started under the Obama administration. Now, President Trump did tweet out his support of the gay community at the beginning of the month, and he promised that his administration would work to decriminalize homosexuality throughout the rest of the world. But this refusal of his administration to allow embassies to fly the rainbow flag during June was deemed an insult to the LGBT community by Now This. The Washington Post laid the blame on this on Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who, the Post reminded us, is, quote, an evangelical Christian who believes that marriage should be between a man and a woman, unquote. Like it always has been until the last 30 seconds of human history. And who, quote, has downplayed some symbols of LGBT rights, unquote. Robin McCutcheon, who blogs at Transgender at State, wrote, quote, day by day, a death by 1,000 cuts, our rights as LGBT Americans are being eroded with the removal of a guidance here, the rewriting of a policy here, or just the quiet disappearance of a website, unquote. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar bluntly tweeted out, quote, this is another example of this administration's bigotry and discrimination against the LGBTQIA+ community. Or take the Trump administration's transgender ban, which, according to the Ninth Circuit Court, was implemented because of discrimination against transgenders, meaning that it's another example of sex-based discrimination. And we know that this is the case because, according to Big Things' Zach Ford, the transgender ban was largely cooked up by Vice President Mike Pence, another evangelical Christian, as well as the Heritage Foundation's Ryan T. Anderson, who wrote a book of the philosophical contradictions of transgender ideology called When Harry Met Sally. Obvious bigots, both of them, which means that the transgender ban only exists because of hate and animus. And then there's just the general rise of hate crimes against the LGBT community. In November of 2018, the Human Rights Campaign released a report entitled, New FBI Statistics Show Alarming Increase in the Number of Reported Hate Crimes, which states that from 2016 to 2017, there was a 17% increase in the number of reported hate crimes. The Human Rights Campaign reported, quote, in 2017, 7,175 hate crime incidents were reported, 1,130 of which were based on sexual orientation bias, and 119 on gender identity bias. These numbers reflect a 5% increase in reporting of hate crimes motivated by sexual orientation bias, and a 4% decrease in reporting of hate crimes motivated by gender identity bias. Despite the slight decrease in reported hate crimes motivated by gender identity bias, anti-transgender violence remains an epidemic, unquote. And then when you have stories like that coming out of the UK about the 2 lesbians who were brutally physically assaulted by the 5 teens, it might make you think, yeah, maybe hate crimes against LGBT people are on the rise. Except that those claims and those stories actually represent a warped view of what people want to be true instead of what actually is true. Let's take these 3 issues one at a time to start with. First, the LGBT flag. Being LGBT doesn't mean that you're your own country, your own nationality, your own race, or anything like that. The gay flag doesn't represent any of those things. It represents a personal movement and organization. So its flag is just one of any number of personal organizations and movements like the Boy Scouts of America, the Red Cross, the American Legion, etc. But being part of an organization or a personal movement doesn't erase the fact that we're all Americans and that the US flag represents all of us as a country, and so that it's the US flag that should be the one that's flown at all the embassies. Especially when we take equality into consideration, it doesn't make any sense for US embassies to promote one group of Americans over other Americans, unless of course we're going to start doing that for every single group in the United States, an idea in and of itself that's going to dissolve the idea of national unity. Saying that the rainbow flag isn't going to fly below the stripes and stars might be taking away a privilege, yes, but it's not erasing rights or existences. It's just saying that as a US embassy, it's going to represent all Americans equally. The administration has prevented transgender individuals from joining the military, but only if you are transgender, have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, are undergoing transition, and try to join the military after April 11th of 2019. One of the main defenses for this policy has been the idea of military readiness. Ideologues have laughed at that defense, saying that it's just an excuse to take it out on transgender individuals and to discriminate against them. But the thing is that it's really not. According to Jesse Ehrenfield, who is one of the country's foremost experts on transgender healthcare and military service, according to Slate, each transgender individual's transition is different and unique to him or her. And this cuts into the idea that the transgender ban is just something done to stick it to the transgender individual who wants to serve his country in the military. Because if each transgender individual's transition is something that they need to go through in order to feel complete and psychologically whole, and if that transition is different and unique according to the person, then by its very definition, that cuts into military readiness, since you never know what sort of accommodations you're going to have to make when that individual begins to transition. And military readiness isn't even the only reason for the ban. There are other issues at play, according to Ryan T. Anderson. For example, there's the idea that to be efficient, the military needs to hold all of its members according to the same standard of physical fitness, which should be based on biological sex and not subjective gender. Because today, when you can identify as a cat, pansexual, two-spirit, or even an alien, subjectivity is basically the only thing tying all these things together. And the medical judgments, conscious rights, and religious liberty of the officers, chaplains, and the other soldiers need to be taken into consideration and protected as well. And as for the rise in hate crimes against LGBT Americans, well, Chad Felix Green, writing over at The Federalist, pointed out some problems with the Human Rights Campaign's report. Green wrote, quote, "The HRC relies on a common assumption in discussing hate crimes and violence by insisting the reporting only shows a fraction of the real-world incidents. The difficulty here is, of course, that since the numbers have adjusted only slightly over the years, a lack of reporting does not necessarily indicate unreported crimes. It is important to note that the definition of hate crime varies state to state, and the categories of this crime can include persons, property, or society," unquote. As an example of this, Green references the story of a Long Island man who, after caught stealing rainbow flags from a church, was actually charged with a hate crime, which is kind of different from lynching, calling for a lynching, or burning crosses in someone's front yard. You know, just a little bit. Even the atrocious story of the 2 women who were physically, brutally attacked in London doesn't hold water as an example of a homophobic hate crime, because the reason why these teens attacked these 2 women was because they refused to make out when they were egged on by the teens. meaning that they weren't attacked because they were lesbian, but because they refused to give an impromptu softcore performance when they were egged to do so. If there is one thing that the gay community is not today in 2019, it's oppressed. And if you don't believe me on that, just take a brief look around you. Look at Jack Phillips, the Colorado baker, and Barronelle Stutzman, the Washington state florist. Both politely declined to participate in gay weddings because of their religious beliefs, and both were sued because of that decision, with Stutzman actually being sued professionally and personally. And both cases found themselves at the doors of the Supreme Court. In Phillips' case, the Supreme Court actually ruled in his favor, but only because it ruled that the Colorado Human Rights Commission had acted with undue bias towards him. Which means that Phillips is being sued again because he politely declined to bake a transgender transitioning cake. The court actually chickened out and flat out refused to hear Stutzman's case, meaning that a lower court ruling against her is probably at this point going to stand. When religious liberty, which is a natural right, takes a backseat to LGBTQI+ rights, you're not oppressed. Or look at the high school football players in Salt Lake City who were indefinitely suspended after a Snapchat video surfaced showing some of them burning a gay pride flag to gawps from their audience, as well as one lone unidentified voice saying, "All gays die." Stupid, rude, crude, callous. I've got a lot of adjectives to describe that video, and I'm not going to defend them. But when burning the flag of your country is protected as free speech, and the burning of a personal movement organization flag is a hate crime at the very least, you're not oppressed. Or remember multimillionaire and LGBT activist Tim Gill, who back in 2017 said that sexual orientation and gender identity laws were going to be used to quote-unquote punish the wicked, his words, not mine, and force people like Phillips and Stutzman in associating and participating with gay weddings, religious beliefs, religious objections, conscious rights, all be damned. Yeah, I've got a feeling that if the LGBTQIA community was really oppressed in America today, he wouldn't have been able to say that publicly, and if he did, he definitely wouldn't have been able to get away with it. In fact, when you're allowed to have gay pride parades in broad daylight in the biggest cities in the country, New York, Chicago, LA, Atlanta, where congressmen and women and presidential candidates attend in full regalia, I'm going to make an executive call and say, you're not oppressed. Isn't that a good thing? Who would want to be someone who's oppressed rather than someone who actually won their fight and can now rest on their laurels? This especially doesn't make any sense when you consider that the gay community in the US and Europe have it so much better than gay people in other parts of the world. Iran and Saudi Arabia come immediately to mind, where you can still be hanged and pushed off of buildings to your death if you are caught in homosexual activity. With that contrast, saying that you're oppressed makes you look ungrateful, disingenuous, and, dare I say it, like you're lying. Don't do that. But what say you? Has the gay community won its fight and are no longer oppressed? Or are people like Jack Phillips and Barronelle Stutzman still standing in the way of full equality? As always, let me know your thoughts, your ideas, your opinions down in the comments section below. Well, that about wraps up everything for right now, gang. As always, if you liked the video, whether you agreed with me or not, don't forget to show your support by giving it a like and sharing it on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other social media platforms. And if you like videos about the culture, politics, and religion, but from a different POV, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel and to ring the bell for notifications so that you will always know when I post new videos like this every Tuesday. Videos you're not going to want to miss. As always, thank you for watching, for giving me a little bit of your time. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed to my channel. I appreciate each and every one of you. And I will see you all again here next week, gang, on top of the stone. Ciao.